and welcome to Interfaith Connections. I am your host, Jacqueline Fuller. Today's episode, we are discussing mental health in faith communities. And I have for our guest today, Reverend Dr. Robert Phillips, who is an Episcopal priest with the Diocese of Washington, D.C. Wow, last time I seen you, you were in another role, and now you're in this new role. So can you share with everyone some background information about yourself and your role as a pastoral counselor?
Well, I'll begin with the beginning in that I'm a second career type of minister, in that for about 20 some odd years, I was a software consultant and got this calling to go into the ministry when I was about 40. And that was a little while ago, a little while ago. But I knew that in this calling that it was going to focus upon pastoral care and counseling, something that I've always had a love for. Even in doing the consulting business, you have to develop healthy relationships with people. You have to be able to meet them where they are. So went to divinity school, finished in 2003, was initially ordained with the Disciples of Christ tradition, kind of an offshoot of the Presbyterians, if you will. And years working in hospice, working in higher education as director of admissions, in fact, for the divinity school at Vanderbilt, where I graduated, and then getting my doctorate ultimately in pastoral counseling and being certified with the American Association of Pastoral Counselors. And so it's been quite the journey along the way, quite the journey. And now I'm very excited about being able to go deeper into this whole pastoral counseling piece, because I think there's such a need for it. I wear a couple of hats. I'm an Episcopal priest, that's true, at one of the parishes in Washington. I'm also the chaplain and religion teacher at an all-boy diocesan school here in Washington as well. I do the counseling, and I do adjunct work at one of the community colleges here in the area. So in all of those roles, while it sounds like I have a lot, and I do, but in all of those roles, I think that the ability, the skill set of developing healthy relationships with people is something that definitely comes to the forefront.
Okay.
So I thank you for the opportunity to come and talk about it.
Absolutely, you're welcome. This is a very important topic for me. It's an issue I do advocate for mental health education, mental health awareness. And my calling into doing this work in the interfaith arena is to find ways to connect people of different traditions on issues that could be similar no matter what people believe. So in thinking, I was like, I've been wanting to do a show on mental health for a long time, and I always say the right people will come to me when God brings them. I want to ask you, what is it like in your profession dealing with mental health in a faith community? How is it interpreted with the congregation? And why do they still struggle to see it as an illness, like maybe as a cancer or any other kind of condition? Why does it still have some of the struggles for people to officially say, this is a health issue?
Well, there's a stigma. There's still a stigma that does exist. And it makes sense that we would have these stigmas, truth be told. I don't necessarily lift them up, but it makes sense because we live in a very image-conscious society. And so nobody wants to be considered as less than or a little off or a little cray-cray, as the young people say. People don't want those labels placed on them. And so they'll do anything and everything to deflect any type of perception that others might project onto them. And so it makes sense that they would feel that way. The good news, though, I think that over time, as of 2017, I believe that this stigma is slightly diminishing, slowly but surely diminishing. Not a great deal, but there is some positive movement. And one of the reasons that I say that is because in a lot of our larger churches in particular, I'm seeing more and more mental health ministries popping up.
Oh, wow.
More and more. Now, that typically occurs in our larger churches, but across the spectrum, I think, across the spectrum of sizes, but in particular in our larger churches, because they have the finances, they have the funding, the resources. I think that one of the reasons that it's popping up a little bit more, that the need is being identified, people are more forthcoming, is because there's more information available. And we have a lot of access at our fingers with our phones, with the internet. The internet, you can go online now and just Google anything and everything, as you know, about what you might be experiencing or what you have observed a family member to be experiencing. And all of these hits will come back. And you can investigate them. You can read those at your leisure in the confines and the privacy of your home. And I think that's a major thing, as opposed to having to get up the gumption, get up the energy, the strength to go to another person face to face, set up an appointment, and engage in a conversation about what you may be feeling and or what you may have experienced with a family member or somebody close to you. So I think that that's one of the reasons that we don't, that the resistance is diminishing a bit. It's still not where it needs to be, and that's going to continue to take time. But it's getting a little bit better. Knowledge is power. Knowledge is power. And one of the things that you can find online is not only information about your situation, whatever situation in which you find yourself, but also you'll see these testimonies that all these other people are going through that as well. And so that gives you, it makes you feel good. It makes a person feel good to know that I'm not the only one that's struggling with this. I'm not alone.
Right.
So.
And that you mentioned that I'm not alone piece. Sometimes people isolate themselves because of the concerns, the stigmas that you mentioned, but others may seek out maybe a safe space like a church. In that seeking out, how can churches create like that space where that individual can come to a faith leader or a clergy member and say, I am having these situations or these conditions. I know something's not right. I've been dealing with a lot of stress. I think I'm depressed. And how can those clergy or those faith leaders do it in a way where they're not, where it's usually heard a lot saying you can pray it off, and you know it takes more than just praying something off.
Right.
How can these leaders approach it in a way that's more, and not to say prayer is also compassionate, but it has to go beyond just the prayer. I feel like the prayer is the first step. What can they do to work with that individual if they come to clergy about a condition?
Well, that's an excellent question. It's probably the $50 million question as far as how relevant it is and how sensitive an issue it is. Because I think at the base of that is churches have to create a safe space. They got to create a safe space. And at the root of a safe space is going to be a non-judgmental dynamic where you feel free in coming forward and actually sharing that which is going on in your life, and knowing that it's going to be held with respect, with reverence, with a sacred timber to it, if you will. One of the keys to that, I think, as far as the pastor's involvement, and the pastor, it has to come from the top, from leadership. It has to. That, if I could even encourage another show on that topic, it has to come. It has to come from the top, because I've seen it in various parishes. Having a committee, a mental health committee, is a wonderful piece. A mental health ministry, wonderful piece. The chair of that ministry needs to be the pastor, because that's the person that is going to that's the person who's going to be perceived in a way that the people will listen to what he or she is saying. Getting back to the safe space piece, it has to be a non-judgmental type of environment in order to feel safe. You got to know that you're not the only one going through this. So it's the pastor's responsibility from the very beginning in everything that he or she does, from the pulpit and sermons, from Bible study on Wednesday nights or whatever it is, from workshops that are held throughout the week or throughout the month, throughout the year, to first of all normalize whatever the people are feeling, regardless of what the situation is. If you've been through hell, then it makes sense that you are not skipping down the street happily. Right. It makes sense. It makes sense that if you have just experienced a traumatic loss, that you're going to be devastated. It makes sense. One of the things that is so frustrating is that people don't want to admit the fact that they feel the way that they do. Exactly.
And that's like a self-denial, which I feel will trigger more problems.
More stress.
And more stress.
Because, truth be told, the definition of stress, or rather one of the ways in looking at it from a clinical perspective is situations in and of themselves are not stressful. What makes a situation stressful is your appraisal of your ability to handle that situation.
Right.
And more often than not, when you are going through it, when you find yourself in the middle of the valley of the shadow of death, you don't know what to do.
Right.
You don't know, so you're going to get stressed. So one of the responsibilities, I think, one of the objectives of these mental health ministries as headed up by the leadership of the church is to give some practical ways of how to navigate through life when you're going through some very difficult times. And one of the first things you have to do is to be honest with yourself about how you're feeling. And it goes deeper, of course, as far as trying to figure out, well, what was your role in this situation? And what was that thing that triggered you to do whatever you did? I share with all of my clients that, especially I do a lot of work with couples. And couples come to me, of course, in periods of stress and duress, and they're on the brink of breaking up and divorce, etc. They rarely come and just say hello to me. So one of the things that I tell them is that while your partner did press your button, your partner did not install your button.
Okay.
Did not install your button, which invites more self-reflection. What was going on within me? What, in looking at our childhoods and looking back at the ways in which our caregivers provided a certain type of care for us that may have been very healthy, may have been quite damaging. And we carry that along. We meet people, and so we decide, in our own way, consciously and or subconsciously, we want that person with whom we have connected to change the narrative that we have up until that date. So that kind of gets into another space as far as relationships. But the bottom line with respect to what the churches can do is to create that safe space by, one, not being judgmental, and by having the pastor to normalize whatever the people are going through.
Okay. Now, going back to leadership, what would be the appropriate way for a minister or a pastor or bishop or maybe even someone in another tradition to emphasize like the awareness of mental health with their congregation in their community? Should it be through sermons? Should it be through scriptures or the spiritual reference texts? How can that, or say on any given Sunday, how can that work for that?
Well, it's all of those things that you mentioned, plus. It's
Okay.
every resource that is available to the minister, to the clergy person. One of the things that you can do, again, you got to normalize things. You got to normalize it. Use the resources that are familiar to your people already. For example, in Christianity, the Holy Bible. And particularly as people are going through it, there is a piece in there that speaks exactly to that, straight to that, in the form of the lament psalms. And the book of Psalms is divided up into X amount of categories. The largest category of the book of Psalms are the lament psalms, when the Israelites were going through it and they were railing at God. They were howling at God. Psalm 13, in fact, is called the howling psalm.
I want to just hold you there because we have to take a break,
Okay.
but hold that thought and we will be right back.
Right.
Welcome back to Interfaith Connections. I am your host, Jackie Fuller. We are discussing today mental health in faith communities, and I have here as today's guest, Father Phillips. So we're gonna get right back to where we were talking about, and because I know you're very passionate about it, but yeah, just give us more of the meat and potatoes with that.
More meat and potatoes. More meat and potatoes. A full meal.
Full meal.
Well, one of the things, it's kind of a death knell for a pastor and or for a mental health professional even to walk into a church on any given day and just start speaking about mental illness and mental health. It's overwhelming. It's like a tsunami of reactions that you would experience. you've got to package it in such a way that people are able to hear it. And one of the ways that I've learned that this packaging can look like, if you will, is in the form of pastoral care initially. Not so much pastoral counseling, but the pastoral care piece, where you are able to, again, connect the familiar resource, the familiar spiritual and religious resources of your people to an idea that you want to further develop. For example, with respect to the book of Psalms, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, the book of Psalms has its largest category are the lament psalms. Those psalms in which the people were railing, sometimes against God, sometimes against each other, sometimes even against themselves. Psalm 13 is one of the ones that I gravitate towards a great deal. It's even called the howling psalm because it has the repetition of how long, O Lord, will you forget me forever? How long must I bear this in my heart? And so pointing parishioners and congregants to those pieces, those religious resources of which they are familiar. You say anything about the Bible, people can typically, a lot of people, not everybody, a lot of people typically will gravitate towards that big Bible that was on their grandmother's coffee table, okay? But it's something familiar for them, and so they're a little bit more open to hear, well, what do you have to say about that? I know about that, what's in it? Then you invite them into kind of a journey through the Psalms, through those Psalms, and they start to see that, oh my God, here's some people that are talking about things they're going through that I can relate to. They're angry, they're hurt, they feel betrayed, they feel all of these emotions that I too can relate to. I teach a class, in fact, I developed a class entitled Mirrors of Hope that I teach the 5 components of the lament psalm: the address, the complaint, the petition, the confession of trust, and finally the vow to praise, each week to parishioners. And I encourage them to select a season of disorientation, a time when they were really going through it, and to apply what they've learned about each one of those components to that situation. At the end of the class, they have developed their own personal lament psalm that they can use for future reference. It's that enables a bridge to be formed from the pastoral care piece to now into the pastoral counseling piece, because they've reached a point where they are admitting, yeah, that was a hard time in my life. And you know what? I thought I had closed the chapter on that book or closed that book, but I really hadn't because of all these feelings that are now coming up. And they'll come to me and they'll say, Father Phillips, maybe I need to talk a little bit more about this. So then we've crossed the bridge from pastoral care into pastoral counseling. I'm still there to care for them in a pastoral way, but now I'm thinking more about diagnoses and treatment plans and things that we might be able to do to move them into a space of wholeness that they ultimately want.
And I just had a thought here for some people who religion may be new to them and these terms are new. What is the key difference between a pastoral counselor, other than the spiritual sounding name, and a therapist? And is a pastoral counselor also certified in the same ways as a therapist is, or is it a totally different training?
Not totally different training.
Okay.
A pastoral counselor is a person who is, if you're with the American Association of Pastoral Counselors, which is what I'm with, a person who intentionally integrates spirituality with psychotherapy, all right? And that looks like creating a space so that a person can explore whatever they're going through within the context of their faith. Quite simply, what that means is you look at the nature of God, some of the aspects of the nature of God: love, mercy, grace, forgiveness, compassion, care. And you ask yourself the question, how are those dynamics? Take one, for example. How is grace playing itself out in your life right now? Or how is grace not playing itself out in your life right now? Your response is going to be based upon your understanding of grace. Your understanding of grace is going to be kind of wrapped in your understanding of God and how God has been relevant in your life. You pull that together with whatever current experience that you're going through, and then you have an understanding, you have at least the foundation for a conversation as to how my faith is impacting my current experience and vice versa. Therapists therapists do not necessarily have that type of intentional skill set. We have to, as pastoral counselors, we have to go to school and take X amount of very specialized classes in order to do that. Therapists have their own set of classes that they have to take, but both of us have to take clinical classes such that we know what we're talking about when it comes to the therapeutic piece. Coming to a pastoral counselor, however, will give you that added oomph if you are looking for that with respect to faith. And truth be told, a lot of my clients come to me because they are looking for that. A lot of my clients are minorities that will come to me because their faith is something that is very, very, very important to them. Not all of my clients, but a lot of them are. So that's the difference between the pastoral counselor and other therapists in the secular world, if you will.
Okay. Now, when you say minorities, is that particularly predominantly African American or any other group? Okay.
Most of the predominant minority I speak of is the African American population.
Now, within the community, do you think a lot of the reasons why it's been a challenge to talk about this particular topic is because of historical things? Maybe, I don't know if you want to say, could slavery be a factor, or just cultural issues where it could be interpreted a little differently than maybe say how, and you know, like, what's the saying? I had a pastoral counselor say to me, she said, like, white people will go to a therapist and black people will go to church. And I was like, wow, she's right.
Yeah.
So if you're also in that environment where in a lot of cases it's not supportive and that's work that needs to be done, how can a person who goes through maybe a predominantly African American church that may not have that kind of support system there, is it something that could be cultivated, or should they look elsewhere or take a break from church, look for a new church? What should they do if they're in that situation, if they feel like they may not be supported?
That's a huge question.
It's a deep question.
Deep question. And I guess I have to lead out initially with it depends.
Okay.
It depends. You know, so many things are going on in that in that question. People go to church for different reasons. People go to church for different reasons, and sometimes that which is offered within the context of a worship service is going to enable you to press the reset button upon, or at least upon entering the service, so that you can kind of be open to wherever the Holy Spirit is going to take you. And I'm a big advocate of that. That's why when I counsel with people, I always tell them that there are X amount plus one entities in the room, always including the Holy Spirit. I think that when you find yourself hitting the reset button again at the end of service, going back to where you were emotionally, then that's when you have something that you really need to sit with, because you're probably dealing with a type of chronic, well, you are dealing with a chronic type of condition. You know, mental illness is the type of thing that has a consistent type of dynamic to it versus having a blue day. Right. Having a rough day. You know, when you see that you're not enjoying the things that you used to do for a long time, when you are constantly down and don't really know why, or haven't, well, yeah, because at that point you don't really know why.
Right.
You know, it's time to start doing something. It's time to start doing something. Hopefully you are surrounded by people that can kind of invite you into a space of exploration as to what's really going on. With respect to the church, I don't say that people should leave the church if they are constantly feeling like that. What I do say is it's an opportunity for the pastors once again to assume that type of leadership. You know, it's just incumbent upon leadership to talk about these things. Even being, as the pastors are able to, being transparent themselves, saying, you know, I've had some rough times. I've been very anxious before. I'm bipolar, whatever the case may be. And taking that risk, knowing that in being true to one's calling, I think it does require that type of transparency, especially for us as clergy, as leaders of different flocks, whatever the flock might be.
Okay. So how can, it's so much I want to say, I know time is winding down, but what are the key things you can share in the last couple of minutes with people being able to either reach out to you or resources available in general, groups? What do you got?
Well, I'll be very simple about that. One, please feel free to reach out to me. And my email address is robert.phillips620@gmail.com. Also, I lift up the Pastoral Counseling and Consultation Center of Greater Washington. I know it's a mouthful, but that is a licensed organization in Washington that has a wonderful group of therapists. I used to be one of their therapists as well, and just a wonderful group that is very intentional about taking care of the person in a very holistic way, which includes that faith piece as well. So their website is www.pastoralcounselingdc.com, and they will be more than happy to get in touch to engage you in conversation about them. And I would love to continue the conversation as well.
Okay, because what we can do, we can also, because there's some more things I want to ask about, and since we're running out of time, we can transition this to a part 2 piece. But for those who are watching now who may want some, I guess, information that will be helpful. But I do want to ask one final thing. For you personally, why do you enjoy what you do?
My passion is in developing healthy relationships with others. That's my passion. It's been my passion all of my life. One of the things about a passion is that it takes a risk. And I've worked in psychiatric hospitals. I've been threatened, I've been jumped on, spit at, the whole works, and I keep coming back. It's a piece that truly surpasses all understanding, because my friends will ask me, Phillips, why on earth do you keep doing that? And I can't not do that. I enjoy it. I've seen the way that the finger of God has moved in the lives of the people with whom I've come in contact, the way that God has used me, not me, but through me, in serving people and ministering to people. And the outcome is just phenomenal. And I hope to be able to experience that outcome myself.
Okay, well, great. Well, thank you for being here to help us with this first piece and discuss this topic.
Thank you.
You're absolutely welcome. And for more information for our viewers to find out about Interfaith Connections, please go to our website at www.interfaithconnections.squarespace.com. And we will continue with the subject in the next episode, more mental health. Thank you.
Great.
Take care. Bye-bye.